Welcome to the Adoption and Foster Care Journey, a podcast to encourage, educate, and equip you to care for children and youth through adoption, foster, and kinship care. Hosted by an adoptive mom with over 22 years of kinship and adoptive parenting experience. She's on this journey with you. Please welcome Sandra Flach.
You will keep in perfect peace all who trust in you, all whose thoughts are fixed on you. That is Isaiah 26, verse 3. I am your host, Sandra Flach. Welcome to the Adoption and Foster Care Journey, where I am here to encourage and equip you. I too am an adoptive mom. I'm actually a mom of 8, 5 through adoption, all with trauma histories, including 2 who are now young adults who are both diagnosed with fetal alcohol syndrome when they were little. So I too navigate all the challenges of raising children with trauma histories and prenatal substance exposure. I am still on this parenting journey. One of our boys still lives at home. The other lives like in an apartment attached to our garage. So he sort of has that interdependence model that we use, which is just support with a little bit of independence. And that's going pretty well. But ask me on any given day and you might get a different answer. But I am still on this journey. And my hope is that you will find this podcast an invaluable resource for your journey. This week, we have our favorite returning guest back with us. Dr. Jerrod Brown is in the house. But before we get to our conversation with him, I want to tell you about some of our resources, including a free gift for you. We have 12 breath prayers to steady your heart. It's available on our website. So whether you go to sandraflach.com, which is my sort of personal website with my blog and all that there, it'll pop up where you can enter your email address so that we can email you a downloadable, printable version of the 12 breath prayers. But if you go to our regular website, justicefororphansny.org, and click Adoption and Foster Care Journey, the pop-up will show up there. You can get to my website from that website. It's the same blog on both websites. And I know it sounds maybe a little crazy to navigate, but it's super easy, really. If you just go there, you will figure that out. And there are links to all of the websites that I mention in the podcast. If you go to the show notes, there's links to everything there. My personal email, that's not necessarily my personal email, but my ministry email is there, Sandra Flach at justicefororphansny.org. And I answer my own email and I will respond to you if you have a question, if you have a comment, if you have a suggestion for a topic or a future guest on the show, that kind of thing. My email is in there. All of the website information is in there, all the links. So anything I mention here, you can always go to the show notes to easily find where those things are, just so you know. And what I love about breath prayers is they are a fabulous way to slow down in the moment, to send up sort of like an SOS prayer, but you're sending it up really with some deep breathing that helps calm your nervous system, and you're praying God's word, because every breath prayer is inspired by scripture. And it's just a great way to help you navigate each day. And in my book, Soul Care Saturday 52 Devotions for Foster and Adoptive Moms, which is available on Amazon, I feature breath prayers each week. So you have 52 breath prayers in the book, along with scripture and of course the devotional and a journaling page and all of those things. But you can get 12 of them for free by going to the website and downloading them. So I invite you to do that. Also, I offer online training, and my next webinar coming up is on Wednesday, September 16th. At 10 a.m. Eastern Time. Wired Differently is a 3-hour online workshop for parents, caregivers, professionals, anybody working with children with brain differences. We're going to focus on the impact of trauma and prenatal exposure to alcohol and the impact that has on the brain and the body. And we're going to unpack primary, secondary, and tertiary symptoms of brain-based differences, including FASD. So there'll be a strong focus on FASD, but it's not just FASD. If you are parenting a child who has trauma, who has an ADHD diagnosis, an autism diagnosis, any of the things, right? Any of the brain-based things, this 3-hour workshop will really put some tools in your toolbox that you need for your parenting journey. So I hope that you will check it out. Whether you're parenting young children, teenagers, young adults, you will find this workshop very helpful. Register for it. So get your spot today. Again, link in the show notes. Would love to connect with you in person. I will be at the Christian Alliance for Orphans Summit in September in Atlanta, the September 23rd through 25th. I will be leading an FASD coaching room, so you can stop by there, and also a meetup for parents and caregivers raising kiddos with FASD. And I'll have a resource table in the exhibitor hall, so you can find me if you're coming to Atlanta. And then actually from Atlanta, I will be flying into DC for the FASD United affiliates Impact Week, which my nonprofit is an affiliate of FASD United. So I will be rubbing elbows with all of the amazing folks, many of the amazing folks in the FASD community, and coming back with some great information to share with you all as we continue to learn and grow in our knowledge of FASD. And then in October, I will be at the Replanted Conference in Chicago. That's October 15th through 17th. I will be doing 3 breakout sessions there, as well as a soul care session, some sessions on FASD, and then also have an exhibitor table with information and resources that you can just find me there and connect. Would love to do that. So I hope that you'll be able to get out to one of those 2 conferences, CAFO, Replanted. And then I have room in my calendar for you. So if your group, if your church has an adoption and foster care ministry, your organization, if you would like to bring me in to speak, to do some FASD training or speak at a retreat that you're having for foster and adoptive parents, moms, reach out to me. My email, again, is in the show notes. I would love to come to you or work out something where we're doing it online. So be sure to reach out if you're interested in that. And make sure that you check out our website for all of our resources in addition to the training, in addition to this podcast. Of course, I also offer my one-on-one parent coaching. So if you're raising a kiddo with FASD and you really want some one-on-one guidance and support, you can sign up for coaching, whether it's just a one-time 1-hour visit with me, or you want to do something weekly, bi-weekly, whatever you want to do. It's flexible. We work it out according to your schedule. And of course, our support group, which is phenomenal. And if you are raising a kiddo with FASD, diagnosed or not, this is your community. You will want to be part of this online support group. So all of those details are there. Check out the website and get it and access them, because there are, we offer these things to help support you along the way. Now, today we have, like I said, our favorite returning guest, Dr. Jerrod Brown, with us to talk about what foster and adoptive parents need to know about frontal lobe impairment. Guys, he suggested this topic and I'm like, yes, sounds wonderful. And then I was thinking, I'm not really sure what that is, but I do have a suspicion that he's going to be talking to us somewhat about executive function, because that's what happens in that prefrontal cortex. So he will tell us about that. But just so that you know a little bit about Dr. Brown, in case you are new to this podcast, he only has like 6 PhDs, and he specializes in topics related to autism, FASD, confabulation, suggestibility, trauma, and other life adversities, alexithymia, executive dysfunction, just traumatic brain injury, all kinds of things. His full bio is listed on our website because it would take a very long time for me to read it all to you. And we also have dozens upon dozens of bonus episodes featuring Dr. Brown on our website. So if you're just looking for his content because it's scientific and it goes deep in the weeds on these topics, instead of, combing through our wherever you listen to this podcast, you can go right to our website and go to the podcast section, and you'll see where you can click a button and get to all of our episodes with just Dr. Brown. And then the topics are listed, so you can listen to whichever ones you want. And you know what? You always need a notebook because you're always going to want to listen again and take notes because he just is a wealth of information. So without further delay in bringing him on, let's dive into today's topic. Please welcome back Dr. Jerrod Brown. Welcome back, Dr. Brown.
Sandra, thank you for having me. So honored to always come back.
It is an honor to always have you back because you just bring so much knowledge and expertise and science and all of those things that we need to know as parents and caregivers of kids who have spent time have been adopted, have been spent time in the foster care system, have those adverse childhood experiences. And you teach it to us on a level that parents can understand, which I greatly appreciate, but such invaluable information. So thank you for being faithful to share with our audience. And I wanted to point out too that you do have a slide deck. You have slides to share. So for those who are listening to the podcast in podcast version, then just to let you know that you can go to the Justice for Orphans YouTube channel and you can watch this episode and see Dr. Brown's slides if you would like to do that. And there'll be a link in the show notes where you can find that. But it's right on YouTube on the Justice for Orphans channel. So with that, Dr. Brown, I am going to toss it over to you because I in my opening, I mentioned we're going to talk about frontal lobe impairment, suspecting there may be a little executive function that you're going to talk to us about. But really, I'm going to hand it off to you because I'm going to sit in the seat and learn along with our listeners.
Great. Thank you, my friend. Well, folks, we'll take a deep dive into frontal lobe impairment today. And if you see the title here, a topic all foster and adoptive parents need to know, the reason why I title it that way is if you are raising a child that has a neurodevelopmental disorder, extensive trauma, attachment issues in their history, probably their frontal lobes are not working at optimal levels. So we'll talk about why we really need to care about this topic. It really does drive the bus with human behavior and decision making and problem solving and reasoning and many, many more. My name's Jerrod. Here's my email. If you have any questions, here's a copy of my bio. I'm a professor, trainer, researcher, and consultant. Do a ton of work in the area of neuroscience, tons of work in the area of neurodevelopmental disorders. In our agenda today, I have 3 sections. Give you a really broad overview of frontal lobe impairment. Part 2, I know a lot of caregivers listening to this, but I'm sure there's a lot of professionals. So part 2 is just more geared toward what would a professional want to consider during an intake process, a screening process, when we're thinking about frontal lobe impairment. And then part 3, tips, strategies, solutions, interventions. And again, this is just for information purposes only. Please work with qualified professionals before implementing any of these things. So as we get into this topic here, if you see this visually, this is one reason why we really got to understand the frontal lobes, because when they're working properly, they play a role in language and motor function, morality, ethics, making good decisions, personality, how we regulate our mood, how we do in the social arena, self-awareness, executive function. This is when it's working good. When it's not working properly, you're probably going to see some limitations in a lot of these areas. I'm not saying every single one, everyone's wired differently. And here's many, many more. Just another study. Again, why we want to learn about the frontal lobes, because the frontal lobes play a role in so many functions: memory, attention, emotions, planning, motivation. So if someone really struggles with staying motivated, might be something going on with the frontal lobes. Again, there's other layers here too. If you know somebody that seems to have very poor social skills, They make very bad social skill decisions. They make really bad decisions in friends. They're in and out of very dysfunctional relationships over and over and over again. It could be driven in conjunction with other things. The frontal lobes might not be working properly. When you study the frontal lobes, you'll also want to know about the prefrontal cortex, and this plays a vital role in executive function. It also plays a huge role in judgment, goal planning behaviors, abstract thinking, abstract reasoning. And when you break down the prefrontal cortex, we got a lot going on here. We won't have time to get into every component here, obviously, but the prefrontal cortex has different subdivisions. So these relate to one another. They all do different things, but there's overlap as well. So you have like the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, the medial prefrontal cortex, the orbital frontal prefrontal cortex. So these would be just some things you'd want to be aware of, that the prefrontal cortex has a lot of things going on. It's not just executive function.
Wow.
Everybody with FASD, pretty much everyone with a neurodevelopmental disorder is going to have executive function impairment. Executive function and prefrontal cortex, they really go hand in hand. And if you have somebody, if you know somebody that really struggles with achieving their goals, it could be goals at school, jobs, whatever it is, if it's treatment, if they can't seem to achieve their goals, look to executive function, look to the prefrontal cortex, because that is responsible for goal-directed behavior. If you're stuck and interventions are not working and you just go to therapist after therapist, have those therapists, those providers really dug into executive function and prefrontal cortex, and are there interventions prefrontal cortex and executive function informed? I suspect probably not if the person is going to treatment after treatment and nothing's working. Self-regulation has a lot to do with this. So when we have good, intact frontal lobes, we have better self-regulation, better self-control. We're more patient. We can think through things. We can delay gratification. Why does almost everyone with FASD struggle with self-regulation on some level? Well, it's rooted in frontal lobe impairment, executive function issues, the prefrontal cortex. And these are just 6 variables to consider when we study self-regulation within the context of the frontal lobes. The ability to inhibit the behavioral responses. So when you see this word inhibit, think of the brain's parking brake. Can we put the pause on? Can we slow down? Regulating emotions. If you know somebody that goes from 0 to 60 in a second and they're all over the map with their emotions, laughing 1 minute, screaming and yelling the next, something's not going right, probably with the frontal lobes, the executive function. We all know about adaptive functioning. This is basically independent living skills. How does that person function in day-to-day life when supports and services aren't in place? This has a lot to do with social skills, money management, cooking, cleaning, filling out a job application, using public transportation, staying medication compliant. If somebody has frontal lobe impairment, they probably have limitations in adaptive functioning and real world skills. And as that person becomes an adult, living independently can be a little challenging without the right supports and services in place. And again, just another reminder, study after study, if you're into research, just know frontal lobe dysfunction equals executive function impairment. Here's another visual, and Sandra, I'll kick it back to you in a second after this slide. If you know somebody with one of these diagnoses, maybe you're a parent, you have a child with one or some of these diagnoses, the research does indicate the very nature of having one of these diagnoses should alert you to the fact that probably the frontal lobe and the prefrontal cortex are not working at optimal levels. And it's a spectrum like anything. You can have mild impairment, moderate, severe. Things can make it worse. Other things can make it better. But major depression, ADHD, obsessive compulsive disorder, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, traumatic brain injury, personality disorders, and PTSD all lean in the direction that that person's brain and their prefrontal cortex probably needs a little more attention, a little more intervention. And we'll talk about what we can do about this too. So, Sandra, that's a quick overview right now, and then I can go a lot deeper in a minute.
Oh my goodness, I am fervently taking notes because I find it fascinating the more I learn, my journey into understanding FASD because of my boy's diagnoses with that. And the more I learn about the brain and how it works optimally, and then how how trauma, how prenatal exposure to substances, especially alcohol, how that affects the brain. And of course, I've learned the prefrontal cortex and executive function, but going deep in the weeds, I didn't realize that there were like four parts of the frontal lobe, and so even understanding that and just what you've unpacked for us so far, makes me think about how complex this is. And when we boil it down, like you boil it down for us to understand it, you know, being able to have a better understanding that our kids aren't just being difficult on purpose, lazy on purpose, defiant on purpose. They're not being willful. Not that our kids can't do things like that, but really it is this impairment that is driving the bus, so to speak, and understanding the harm that was caused to the brain, and that there is this reason for why our kids, these behaviors are really symptoms of what's going on with their brain. We can have more compassion and more patience and more understanding ourselves, because this isn't something, and I'm sure you'll get to this, because I was thinking two things I was thinking is what causes this harm, and I think you're going to get to that. And then also, what can we do about it? Does it, can progress be made? Because I'm highly certain that they don't just turn 18 or 21 and they outgrow this, and then we can be empty nesters and our kids can, we're done. Our job is done here. It is, I've got boys who live home in their 20s with FAS, and this is the long haul, and it's because their brain has been impacted. So just, I don't know if I specifically have a question other than just keep going, because this is amazing, and we need to know this.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, we'll get into those things. And Sandra, what you said, I could not agree more. You said it so eloquently. So yes, definitely. Some other things, again, I showed you some things before, but here's another study, just breaks it down a little bit more. So when there's damage to the frontal lobe's prefrontal cortex, you may see more of these things here. Everyone is wired differently. Not everyone's going to have every single one of these 12 variables. You might see more speech language communication issues. So good reminder, work with a speech language communication pathologist. You might see more coordination issues. The person's more clumsy and they may have fine or gross motor skill deficits. You might have more impulse control issues, planning deficits, difficulty maintaining a schedule, showing up late, not showing up at all, slow processing speed, remembering things may be limited in some folks. So it feels like you're saying the same thing over and over again. You're wondering, is this person even listening to me? We just talked about this yesterday. Poor decision making, maybe full-blown panic attacks or panic-like behaviors, and higher levels of unexplained irritability you may see. Executive function deficits, we've talked about that in other episodes I've done for Sandra, but everybody with FASD is going to have executive function impairment on some level. So these are just 7 other variables you'd want to be aware of that you might see in somebody that has executive function impairment. So it's not just prenatal alcohol or drug exposure, but if mom was pregnant and she was dealing with tons and tons of stress, trauma, adversity, hardship, worry, fear throughout the pregnancy process, that in and of itself can contribute to executive function impairment in the unborn child, because stress over a long period of time is called toxic stress, and that can wreak havoc on that baby's brain. The ACEs research, we've done at least one episode on that, maybe a couple, Sandra, at this point. But the adverse childhood experiences research basically indicates you want to be aware of the role and impact that childhood trauma has on human brain and body functioning. And basically, to simplify this research, the higher numbers of traumas that happen to that child earlier on in life and in utero, it likely has negative implications for brain and body development. This is complicated, a lot of stuff going on here, but when we're thinking about trauma, psychological trauma, this could be verbal abuse. It could be exposure to domestic violence, whatever it is, not good for a child. Lots and lots of trauma on that child's brain and body over a long period of time, especially really, really early in development and in utero, may impact white matter. Why you want to care about white matter? Well, learn about white matter and gray matter abnormalities. It has a lot to do with the connection in the brain, how the brain sends signals and then interprets signals from different parts of the brain. And the white matter runs between the frontal lobe and the striatal areas of the brain. And this can alter homeostasis, which basically means if somebody is not in the right homeostasis, their brain and body is out of balance, which then can trigger more behavioral problems, more emotional problems, more mood control issues. Breaking this down a little bit further, so tons and tons of trauma in utero early on in life likely impact attachment patterns. And when you have these things going on, it can adversely impact the prefrontal cortex, the autonomic nervous system, the HPA axis, and the amygdala. These are huge topics to be aware of when you're studying what we're talking about today. If I put on my neuroscience hat right now, tons of childhood trauma impacts the brain. It depends on the type of trauma, when it occurred, the duration, all of those things, what kind of support was put into place after the trauma. But if we look at the brain, it may actually reduce total brain volume. You could have some shrinkage in the brain. It can impact gray matter and loss in the hippocampus, which this has a lot to do with memory. It can impact the
So,
prefrontal.
Jerrod, can I
Yeah, go
just
ahead.
ask a question?
Oh, yeah, please.
Because it applies to exactly this.
Yeah.
So, we talk a lot on this podcast about prenatal exposure to alcohol, other substances, and trauma. So we know that in utero, these things can affect the brain, the developing brain, right? While the brain is developing. But really, you are pointing out here that in early childhood, trauma can actually also affect the brain, because really the brain, I can't remember if it's 5 years old. The brain is still developing, even in early childhood. I know we've done an episode on the first 1,000 days and all of that. So do I understand that correctly? In early childhood, when there's trauma, whether it's physical, verbal, sexual, emotional, it can affect the structure of the brain.
Definitely.
Wow.
The early brain is very vulnerable to stress, trauma, and adversity. And if you had prenatal trauma from drugs and alcohol, and then after that child's born, then in the environment they're living in, is there also trauma? It just makes this even worse and worse and worse. So the
Wow.
first 1,000 days of life really is an area we need to learn, because that's day one of conception all the way to age 2. And maybe a child didn't have trauma until the age of 3. It still can impact them profoundly. But the earlier the trauma happens, and if it's collective and cumulative complex trauma, which means it's happening frequently from many sources, that's even worse typically. And neglect may be one of the worst things too. If that child was never held or picked up, that there's tons of studies on that. And looking at international adoption, some of those studies too, and
Wow.
very sad stuff. Childhood neglect, big topic, and disrupted mother-child relationships can reduce frontal lobe volume. So the child wasn't held by mom. There's a lot of neglect. The child is in the crib all the time, crying. No one's ever looking at the child, picking up the child, talking to the child. Those factors are very traumatic. The child's not going to verbalize it other than probably through lots of crying and sleep issues, feeding problems, but that impacts the frontal lobes. And interestingly, not a ton on reactive attachment disorder, but if you are raising a child with reactive attachment disorder, which I suspect some of you are, if you're raising kids that have been in and out of the foster care, long-term placements and separations and things like that, some of the children may have reactive attachment disorder, and the very nature of having that diagnosis should alert you to the fact that there are going to be probably some problems in the prefrontal cortex, likely caused by trauma and attachment issues. We'll get deeper in this in a future episode, but we all know prenatal alcohol exposure, without a doubt, impacts the frontal lobes. If you are raising a child that has ADHD, that in and of itself should alert you to the fact that probably that person's frontal lobes, again, are not working at optimal levels. So that was a very quick overview for part one, folks. Before I get to part two, Sandra, anything else you want me to go into? Any thoughts, comments?
Oh my goodness, I'm still absorbing it all. One quick question may or not be related. We've done a whole episode, I believe, on confabulation, where the brain fills in missing information, where there's gaps in memory. So what part of the brain would that is responsible for confabulation? Is that part of the frontal lobes?
That gets really interesting. I've given a lot of talks on that very topic, and what it will say is, yes, when there's problems with the frontal lobes, in some cases, the person may be more prone to confabulate. However, the confabulation research says there's plenty of examples where anybody could confabulate under the right set of circumstances. So you and I could confabulate depending on the context, our stress level, what's going on. So yes, the frontal lobes do play a role in that, but it doesn't explain it completely because there's other examples of it. And there's many dimensions of confabulation. If those of you are familiar with confabulation, there's I don't know how many, but I have a slide. I'm just visualizing. I think I have at least like 20 different subtypes of confabulation or more that are found in the literature. So confabulation, there's provoked confabulation, there's spontaneous confabulation. There's a whole line of literature that talks about fantastic confabulation, looks like delusion. So there's many subset as well. So it does get complicated.
Okay, that's another whole podcast episode, I
Yeah.
think.
So anosognosia, this is when their brain is telling them, I don't have schizophrenia. I don't have bipolar. I don't have this, even though they're diagnosed with it and the doctors confirm. Their brain is literally telling them, I don't have this diagnosis. When somebody has that going on, that's rooted in insight deficits and some frontal lobe dysfunction. Perfect segue, Sandra, confabulation. So yes, having high levels of executive dysfunction and frontal lobe damage can absolutely play a role in confabulation, but it's not the only variable, many more. I mentioned this before in the last section. Tons and tons of stress, especially early on in life, not good. This is another reminder why we need to appreciate stress and bring that stress level down as much as humanly possible, because chronic stress in that young child over a long period of time can absolutely impact that child's hormones. It can contribute to cell loss in the hippocampus. It can reduce the prefrontal cortex volume, which then can cause more cognitive dysfunction. You might have more dysregulated neural responses. So it could be something going on with the white and gray matter, throws off our autonomic nervous system. We have an increase then in our sympathetic response, our fight or flight system. And these things can throw off our HPA axis. And in some cases may make that person, as they get older, more prone to migraines, dizziness, gut health, sleep issues, ADHD-like symptoms, and panic attacks as well.
Wow.
So some other things to be aware of. So some other possible signs and symptoms associated with frontal lobe impairment could be apathy, where the person comes off very indifferent. Emotional lability, that's a roller coaster ride of emotions, screaming 1 minute, laughing the next. Having a hard time anticipating what's coming next, planning, sequencing. Having a hard time initiating behaviors where it can look like laziness. Having a hard time monitoring one's own behaviors. Getting stuck looks like rumination, looks like stubbornness. And abstract reasoning deficits, problems connecting the dots, understanding how and why questions. It can look like perseveration in some cases. It can contribute to impaired self-control. It can look like all kinds of things, as you can see here. It can impact our emotions on so many levels. The person could come off as very flat, non-empathetic. So the person could get labeled as, oh, they just don't care. They have no empathy. Might not be the case. Might be more of the story here. It could be something going on in the frontal lobes. Could be they really struggle again with low frustration tolerance. And it could be a factor where they don't pick up on humor, or they don't know how to use humor effectively. How can it impact social behavior? Look at all of these things, and all this is supported in the research countless times over. So frontal lobe dysfunction has profound implications for social health, social well-being. And I would say at the extreme end of things, and I've consulted in many cases, it could be a factor in inappropriate sexual behavior and sex crimes. Unfortunately, there's no way around it. It could be a factor where the person just pulls back from people and they isolate and they have a hard time making friends. It could be a factor that, unfortunately, that child, as they get to K through 12 setting, they may present as a little more socially awkward, and now they're more prone to being bullied and teased, which is a trauma and a stressor in and of itself. If somebody with frontal lobe impairments goes to therapy, and a therapist uses insight-based therapeutic approaches and asks a lot of questions around why and how, and tell me this and tell me that, they're going to struggle probably with that because of abstract reasoning deficits. That is why skills building is more effective, probably, where it's very concrete. Coaching, modeling, teaching, role-playing. And that's why I've been doing a lot of work in the area of Lego-based interventions. That's a great practical tool. Abstract reasoning deficits can also play a role in the engagement of problematic behavior. It's not the only factor, but if you are raising a loved one that has some of these things going on and they engage in a lot of inappropriate behavior, rule following problems, disruptive behavior, maybe they're starting to break the law. This would be a slide you'd want to really hone in on. It could be a big, big piece of this puzzle. The more you can understand this, then we can get the right supports and services in place. Procrastination on the surface could look like lazy and not caring, but in some cases, especially when it's someone with one of these diagnoses we're talking about, it may actually be rooted to something in the brain not firing correctly. So we need to have some more neuroscience-based approaches. Another variable to consider, just a reminder for all of us, if you live a sedentary lifestyle, that in and of itself has been linked with worse executive function. So if somebody's on the screen all day long, they never get up and move, they sleep all the time, sedentary behaviors are terrible for brain and body health.
Mm.
Something to be aware of again. And if you know somebody that is using alcohol, using drugs, they're engaging in problematic behavior, what could be going on? Maybe something with the frontal lobes is off. High levels of alexithymia are very common. If you are not familiar with that topic, check out the episode Sandra and I did on that. 50 to 65% of people with drug and alcohol problems have alexithymia going on. This is when the person really struggles with naming and labeling and making sense of emotions. Sandra, I'll stop there before we get to the good stuff. What do we do about it?
Sandra Flach, host of the Adoption and Foster Care Journey podcast, and FASD educator Debbie Raymond invite you to join Hope for the FASD Journey, a virtual support community for parents and caregivers raising individuals with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, diagnosed or not. This faith-based support community meets online 3 times each month, features special VIP guests, and a private Facebook group for members only, which includes Soul Care Saturday video devotionals led by Sandra and Deb. Both Sandra and Deb are adoptive moms raising kids with FASD and facilitators of the Facets Neurobehavioral Model. For details and to register, visit justicefororphans.ny.org/hope-community. That's justicefororphans.ny.org/hope-community.
Yeah, so many thoughts here. You tackled chronic stress, and it's almost goes without saying that our kids who have come to us through foster care, especially if they've had multiple placements before coming to us, have existed in a chronic stress environment. I think about my kids who were in orphanages overseas. They're all in survival mode. It is that chronic stress. So understanding that and that would have an impact here on the frontal lobes. And then, I mean, honestly, almost everything that you're describing and that you're unpacking describes my boys who've experienced trauma, chronic stress, and prenatal exposure to alcohol, and who knows what else, but we know they have an FAS diagnosis. So this is so relevant and of vital importance to our listeners because this applies to our kids, right? And then I loved how you addressed therapies, right? Because talk therapy where we want our kids to answer those, questions, really doesn't work with especially kids with FASD, but this whole frontal lobes that you're talking about. And so I love the fact that you mentioned, coaching, one-on-one support, modeling, teaching, these, hands-on things, so important for our kids and when we can understand this, then we can advocate that when our kids, and inevitably they will need, counseling and therapies, understanding what we can advocate for, what's going to be a better fit, so important. And then, screen time, I've got to say that, is going to have an adverse, effect on all of this, right? So what's already challenging, especially excessive amounts of screen time or even moderate amounts of screen time, I'm gonna guess has an adverse effect on what these already these challenges.
Yes, definitely it does. And therapy is great, folks, but finding the right therapist is key and the right approach is key. And we'll get in the weeds with some of the things we can do about it. So again, we want to remember the frontal lobes really drive the bus with goal-directed behaviors. And if goals are not working, or if that person is good about making goals, but the goals are so far they're just not attainable. They're so unrealistic. The person's not connecting the dots. They don't have an awareness of their limitations. The frontal lobes might not be working properly. Sandra, we'll go deep in the weeds with all of these coming up in that maybe new series we talked about. This is overwhelming looking at this. And I think this slide in and of itself should remind all of us why you want to have somebody who truly understands neuroscience at the intervention table. Because if you look at this, look at all the parts of the brain involved in learning. And when we think about learning, this goes to the heart of neuroplasticity and goal achievement and how that person's going to function in school. The more you can understand these parts of the brain and what they do and how trauma and adversity, hardship can impact them, then you can set up interventions. Maybe it's not going to cure the part of the brain that's been impacted, but it gives the person other tools and making things more visual, having an external brain. Maybe it's equine therapy, art therapy, music therapy, hands-on interventions, art therapy, puzzle play, Legos, Play-Doh, whatever it is. There's a lot of things. But if you see here, we're talking about the prefrontal cortex, the frontal lobes a lot today, but being aware of the hippocampus, the amygdala, the cerebral cortex, the temporal lobes, the list goes on. It's very, very complicated. What we eat has a lot to do with this. So eating good food, really capitalizing on nutrition, so important for the brain, very important for the frontal lobes. Another slide here, another study, healthy eating, healthy lifestyle practices, very good for brain performance. So let's just break this down here to make this more simple. Healthy diets can lead to positive brain structure and function changes. So good for the frontal lobes. It's good for synaptic plasticity, which means it's good for the communication towers in our brain to be able to communicate with each other more effectively. It's really, really good for glucose control. We want to regulate our blood sugar levels. If our blood sugar levels are out of whack from whatever it is, binge eating, going out for fast food, energy drinks, that's terrible for brain health. Exercise is really good for this. Finding a good exercise specialist, a physical therapist, and join a walking club. I've obviously talked to one's healthcare provider before doing this, but physical activity during childhood, tons of research, really, really good for the prefrontal cortex and all kinds of other things in the brain too. Mindfulness-based stress interventions is very good for the brain and body. It's great for neuroplasticity. It can help enhance resilience. And again, this gets trickier when we're talking about, was that brain damage from drugs and alcohol in utero? It gets more tricky, more complicated. These studies were not specific to a child with that kind of brain, but finding someone who understands FASD and uses these approaches, it's good for any human being. How do you communicate more effectively with somebody with frontal lobe impairment? This could be a caregiver. This could be a job coach, a teacher, a therapist. It's all very common sense. Allow time for the person to respond because the brain has slow processing speed in a lot of cases. Be patient, be gentle in your voice tone. Get to know the person. They're not their label. Get to know what they're interested in. Get them to laugh, do fun things. Find out what they really like. That can help keep them engaged. Talk therapy, sitting face to face, not good for some people. They may do better going for a walk. And do everything you can to look at the environment. Is there a lot of noise, clutter, distractions? If you're a caregiver, full attention to the child, not multitasking, being on the phone, texting at the same time, and putting down the technology, all those things. Here's some other reminders from a communication lens. Create consistency, repetition, routine. The brain loves that. Reduce overload. Too many words can overload the brain. Again, calmly communicate. Respond to emotions and behaviors, but don't get reactive. And then this number 4 is really trauma informed. I mean, provide a safe environment, attachment informed, become neuroparenting informed. Sandra, we did an episode on neuroparenting, I think, didn't we?
I believe so, yeah.
Legos again. Check out the episode Sandra and I did on that. But this is a great article that does talk about the neuroscience aspects of using Legos. Using Legos can be very calming to the brain and body, and it might actually help shift the brain away from the stress and activate other parts of the brain, and it can then help with emotional regulation, focused attention. It's worth trying. I'll stop there, Sandra. I know we could probably go a lot deeper in the weeds, but any thoughts, anything you want me to go a little bit deeper into with interventions?
Well, one thing I was thinking about when you were listing all those, these impairments is consequences and why, they have a hard time making those links and connecting the dots. So a lot of times, our kids with these impairments really don't learn from, punitive parenting, punishments, consequences. Can you chime in on that a little bit?
I believe it probably has a lot to do with abstract reasoning deficits, where if you're verbalizing it, that child's brain is having a hard time connecting the dots and seeing beyond the moment of their action. And there's a case I consulted on recently where the person just continued to make the same mistake over and over and over and again. And the caregivers were using traditional forms of punishment. Once they started making it more concrete, more visual, writing things down, coaching, modeling, teaching, even using Legos as a communication tool and a visual tool, it helped that individual connect the dots a little bit more. It's easier said than done. We have to reinforce it many times over, make sure the child's regulated, because if that child is completely dysregulated, their prefrontal cortex is shut down and they're not taking in the information. So when you're trying to teach that skill as to why you're having these consequences in place, probably the best time to do it is when the child is regulated, then their brain can take it in more and not just verbalizing it again, because some of these kids, teenagers and adults, have a hard time making sense of verbal information, or they have slow processing speed, or their brain just shuts down if a parent is dysregulated and saying all these words to that child at one time. Going for a walk can be very helpful, teaching a skill as well.
Yeah, and I love the practical steps that we can do to help build, healthy brain health, really. Talking about visuals, right? And things like equine therapy and art therapy and Lego brick therapy, things like that, hands-on things, nutrition and healthy eating, so important because the processed foods and the sugars and things like that have a negative effect on everybody's brain. And exercise out in nature, mindfulness, things that will reduce stress. They're all practical things that we can build in to our family life, for our kids every day that can be very, very helpful. So this was just amazing, as always, Dr. Brown, just to have all of this information. And for our listeners, it really is worth your time to go to our YouTube channel and look at the slides, because I am a visual learner. And so I could see the slides, and it is very helpful in taking in the information, and you can screenshot or take pictures of the slides so that you can have that information. I did that a couple times. But just this was incredible, Dr. Brown, and thank you so much for again unpacking, these very important topics which can seem overwhelming and beyond us because of the science and understanding the brain, which is so complex. But you really make it easy for us to understand, and then understand our kids and how it applies to them and how we can support our kids better, for better outcomes. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you for saying that. I really appreciate it. Hope it's helpful, folks. And here's my email. Reach out if you have any questions. And Sandra, I look forward to coming back in the future.
Absolutely. Yep, we have some plans in the works, so stay tuned for future episodes with Dr. Brown. Again, Jerrod, thank you so much, and we can't wait to have you back on again.
You're welcome. Have a good day.
Wow, what an incredible episode with Dr. Jerrod Brown. If you would like to contact him directly, his email is in the show notes. Jerrod01234 brown@alive.net. It's in the show notes. So thank you for listening. I hope that you were inspired and encouraged and educated and better informed by this conversation that we had today with Dr. Jerrod Brown. And like I said, all of our episodes, we've done dozens and dozens of them, are actually stored on our website to make it easy to find. And a lot of the topics that he talked about today, we have specific episodes on, we've done episodes on attachment, nutrition, neuroplasticity, screen time, adverse childhood experiences, complex trauma, executive dysfunction, alexithymia, so many things, and a lot of episodes specifically on FASD. So I highly recommend that you go to the website and just start diving into those episodes. You will want a notebook because there's so much great content there. A lot of our earlier episodes, he did not use a slide deck, so there's not actual visuals. You can always go to the Justice for Orphans YouTube channel to watch the video version of all of our episodes. But it's been more recently, probably the episodes that we've been doing the past year, where he has used a slide deck. So just to let you know that, but the information is amazing, and I hope that you will check it out. He is a vital resource. So you can just go to our website, justicefororphansny.org, click the Adoption and Foster Care Journey button, and then click podcast. Scroll down, and there's an explore button where it says to explore our episodes with Dr. Brown, and that's where you will find them, all of those. So lots of resources we have for you here. Be sure to register for the upcoming online workshop, Wired Differently, on September 16th at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. Again, remember, we have online and in-person workshops, one-on-one FASD parent coaching with myself and you, we work that out, whatever fits best for your schedule. And then, of course, if you are raising a child with FASD, diagnosed or not, because we know it's hard to get a diagnosis, even if it's just suspected, our support group, Hope for the FASD Journey online support group, is a hope-filling, life-changing community you need to be a part of. And you can find out more on our website, links in the show notes. Be sure to reach out to me if you have any questions. If you need anything, subscribe to this podcast, share it with your fellow fostering and adopting friends, follow our social media. Love connecting with you, our Adoption and Foster Care Journey social media specifically. Again, grateful that you spent your valuable time with me today. I am thrilled to have you along for the journey.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Adoption and Foster Care Journey podcast, brought to you by Justice for Orphans. We hope you were encouraged today. Please be sure to subscribe to this podcast and leave a review, and share it with your fellow foster and adoptive parent friends so they can be encouraged too. Be sure to find and follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Justice for Orphans. And check out our website for vital resources at justicefororphansny.org.